Hello and welcome to this week's IG Live. I am so pleased to be talking to an author I've been following for a long time, and that's Kerry O'Malley Cerra. Sorry. Many of you know her for her middle grade fiction books like Hear Me and Make a Little Wave. She is known for centering deaf and hard of hearing kids and teenagers in her books, and now she's back with a nonfiction picture book. We've got her on here to talk with us about it. If you haven't entered our giveaway, be sure to do that when we're done here. It ends tonight at midnight, so don't miss out. Hi. Oh,
Hi.
coordinated our shirts. I think.
Oh,
How
yeah.
are you?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Good. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Am I right that you were at the Air and Space Museum, or you will be later today?
I will be signing there tomorrow and
Yeah.
Saturday. hmm
Amazing. Well, thank you for joining us. I was just talking a little bit about your book, but before we get into that, it'd be fun if we could back up a little bit and then talk about how you became an author in the first place. What was that journey like for you?
I was actually a teacher for quite a while, but I was diagnosed with hearing loss at age 16, and I knew that I would eventually be deaf. So teaching social studies, to me, it was really important to try to have good conversations with kids and not just be lecturing all the time. And it got to a point where I couldn't really do that. So I stepped back. And it was at that time that I discovered writing just completely by accident. So,
Really, so it wasn't anything that you thought you were going to do when you were a kid?
oh no, I loved books. I loved reading, but I never knew that I could be. I just assumed that they were, old men in pubs smoking cigars and typing on old-fashioned typewriters. I just never knew that I could be an author. My school, we didn't have authors come in and speak or anything like that. So, nope, it was never a dream.
Amazing. And now, of course, you're passionate about books that depict deaf or hearing loss experiences for kids. Why is that kind of representation so important? I mean, I don't think I read any books that had any deaf or hard of hearing protagonists when I was growing up.
Exactly that.
Mhm.
When I was diagnosed, I had never seen myself in a book, and I was always very ashamed and very embarrassed of my hearing loss growing up in the 80s and at a time where that wasn't widely accepted. Students weren't typically mainstream. They ended up having to go to a special school, and I didn't want any of that. So I think that I always say that everything happens as it's meant to happen and when it's supposed to
Mhm.
happen, when it is meant to happen. So I don't necessarily go, oh, I wish I could change everything. I feel like my journey and me writing these stories and accepting myself finally after all these years happened, as it was meant to. But I am sad that those books didn't exist with those types of characters when I was younger. And when I finally read C.C. Bell's book, El Deafo, in my 40s, I was sobbing and sticky tabbing everything and like handing it to my family and saying, please read, please understand me. And from there, I really don't know what inspired me to write Hear Me because I don't think I was still ready to tell that story, but I feel like it was incredibly therapeutic. And from there, meeting students at my school visits and just one or two kids that come up to you after and they whisper to you that, I have hearing loss too, or, you know, um, that's what I'm doing it for. So I'm glad I finally became a little bit more brave and able to tell that first story. And now it's my mission to make sure that there are lots of books representing those types of characters. And not just me, there are other deaf and hard of hearing authors out there, and they're all writing amazing work.
Yeah, and people, if they aren't following you on Instagram, should be, because you shared one of those stories pretty recently that happened to an event of a little girl that came up to you, and I think she was maybe just learning sign language, or I can't remember the story, but just how incredible it was for her to be able to meet you.
Yeah, she had gone through cancer treatments, and I'm not sure if she lost her hearing because of the treatments or from the cancer itself. But prior to that, her original diagnosis, her parents were learning ASL with her, and for whatever reason stopped. And so meeting me that day, she asked me to teach her some signs, and we went over and showed her parents, and her dad started crying, and he said, I'm going to put her back in ASL immediately because she does not like her hearing aids at all. So
Oh,
yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate that I get to do that.
right. Well, and how amazing for them that they get to meet somebody like you. And now you have a book about, you want to talk a little bit about this, the Gallaudet 11, and tell us all about the book and the inspiration behind it because it just launched this week. So exciting.
It did. The
Yeah.
timing could not have been better with the Artemis launch and everything
Yes.
else. So it was several years ago that my agent actually said to me, "Hey, have you ever heard of the Gallaudet 11?" And I had, because I had visited Gallaudet University a few years prior and seen a display about them, but it didn't really compute in that moment. And so when she brought it up, I was like, yes, I actually have heard about them, but let me research a little more. And she said, I think you're the right person to tell this story. So from there, I rewrote this book 18 different times. It started out as a sign language book, like A, B, C, trying to tell their story and also teach sign language throughout. But by the time you get to like the letter X and other things, I was just making things up to make the story work. It wasn't happening. So but what it ended up being is just it's amazing. And the men, there are four of them still alive. They're just so thrilled that kids will finally know a story that nobody has ever told.
Yeah, and they were so essential to helping the U.S. in the space race, and yet most of us don't know about them. Why is it so important for kids to know their story and what they accomplished?
For me, it boils down to the fact that as a deaf person myself, I am fully deaf now with a cochlear implant. I know what it's like to be told that you can't do things. And these men, particularly back in the 50s, wanted to serve their country. They wanted to join the military and fight the wars and do all of these things. And they were told repeatedly, no, no, no. And they also lived in a time where a lot of deaf people were hidden in the basement. They weren't considered part of the family. And so they're repeatedly told no in their life. And then they become true national heroes because of the very thing that they're told no for. I mean, I still get chills every time I think about that. So I think the inspiration here is you can break barriers. You should dream anyway. Keep doing it all because you can change history.
Yeah, and I especially love one of the quotes that you have is one of the Gallaudet 11 said, "We were different in a way that they needed," because I don't know if I'll be able to explain this as well as you do in the book, but so they had, I mean, obviously not every deaf person would have this, but they were deaf in a way that made them immune to motion sickness. And so
Right.
they volunteered to do these experiments or these tests that were often dangerous, although one of them said they were so young they didn't, they were just so excited to, like you said, to do their part and to help their country, but they were dangerous. But they did all of these experiments and tests that helped us understand how the body would react to long-term weightlessness. So but it's so cool that, like you said, the thing that got them shut down before was actually like their superpower. It was their gift that let them kind of step in and be the hero. So how does your book help kids kind of think about that, about what makes you different actually can be like your strength?
Sometimes it's just internal, but sometimes it's also about saying yes to as many opportunities that come your way. I don't think the men truly knew what they were getting into when they signed up that day to be tested at camp, on the campus of Gallaudet College at the time. Now it's a university. But they were young and adventurous, and they're like, all right, let's do this. And so sometimes it's just a matter of showing up, just saying yes to something that comes your way and seeing where it takes you. And look at them. I mean, all these years later, it's really just an incredible story when you think about it.
And
They
tell
have
us.
non-functioning vestibular systems that make them immune to motion sickness. So they were all born hearing and became deaf as children. So their fevers were so high that it burned up the fluid in their inner ear, making them deaf and also making them immune to motion sickness. I am also deaf, but I get very, very motion sick. Oh, particularly on a boat, but not on a plane or in a car or things like that.
Right.
So
Well, and you point out in the author's note that when we think about what we learned from those tests that they did, not only helped us in space race, but it helped them develop medicines for motion sickness. So we all
Mhm.
owe them a big debt
Oh,
because,
yes,
like you said,
yes.
we've all used that medication. So,
My daughter is a shark scientist and is now teaching and takes her students frequently on shark tagging trips. And I get to chaperone often. So every time I pop a Dramamine before those trips, I'm like thanking the men, like, thank you so much.
well, tell us about your research process for doing this, because most of us know you for writing fiction. So, what was that like to pivot and write nonfiction, and all the kind of research that goes into it, getting to meet some of the surviving Gallaudet 11. What was that all like?
Well, meeting them is definitely the highlight. The research process, I was, as I said, a history teacher for a long time, so I love that part of it. The hardest part, I would much rather write fiction than this.
Mm,
And all just in terms of like how hard it was. I love it, don't get me wrong, but it was definitely harder than any novel I've ever written. I
mm,
think for me, the research, I knew that some of them were still alive, but I wanted it to still be my story. It was important for me to write it before I made contact with any of them.
mm,
And I have an extensive bibliography. In fact, it didn't even fit in the book.
mm,
And so there's a continuation of that on my website. The research was there. Luckily, Robert Greenman, the first bioastronaut before they even recruited the others, kept a very detailed journal and wrote many
mm,
letters home. So that was incredibly helpful. But the hardest part, I think, for me was my editor kept saying, I need, once I sold it, I need you to get closer. I need the story to get closer. And I'm so used to writing fiction where I can make up someone's point of view that I feel like there's just such a fine line here between me inserting what I think they're thinking in this moment and keeping it nonfiction. And so that was a strong learning curve for me in terms of writing the book, knowing they were alive and, they could come back and go, that is not true. That is not how that happens. So, would it be nonfiction? Would it be informational science? Like, how is it going to be termed when you're trying to insert what you think these guys might have thought or said? So it's definitely a learning curve for me.
and I would imagine also writing, like keeping your age group in mind about how much detail to give and how much to save for the back matter. And how did you
Absolutely.
kind of go back and forth about that?
I did, and I have a really strong critique group, thankfully,
Mhm,
and some of them have tackled these type. This is my first picture book, so they were definitely more well versed. And so, one of them was like, Carrie, take this sentence, which is too scientific, and rewrite it like this. And so once
mhm.
she was showing me one or two lines, I was like, oh, okay, 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 I can do that. So, yeah, that keeping that age group in mind is definitely important. And the editorial process was fantastic with my editor. Yeah, just all around learning curve.
And but you mentioned that you didn't want to meet them until you had the story written. Why not?
I'm not sure. I Part of it was I wanted to do it right by them,
Mm,
but then I also wanted to make sure my facts were correct. So finding
mm,
them when I did, I found Barry first. I searched for over a year and a half for these men, and I
mm,
could not find email addresses or anything. Eventually, I was just using like online registries to, Baron Gulak, he's approximately this age. I found a mailing address for him in New York and sent a letter through the US postal mail and got a response 3 months later. And so he and I were the first to correspond, and he came down and stayed with us during COVID with his wife, which was amazing. And, at that point, it was like I was able to ask some questions. I didn't actually show them the text until after it sold and we were in the editorial process. And by then I had made contact with two others of the,
mm.
the three that we thought were alive. And then we
Oh, hold on. I lost your audio for a second. So you said that you thought there
sorry,
were three, and then recently.
just like around about 2 or 3 weeks ago found that there was a fourth one. And
Really?
so, yes, and
Wow.
all four of them did show up for the signing. I haven't spoken to them since the event last Sunday to see what they think of the text. They didn't see it
Oh.
the full thing in advance. So I'm curious to see what they think of the book at this point.
Well, that explains because when I was getting ready for this interview, I thought in one place you had said three, and then I saw four, so that explains it because that's
It was the
amazing.
coolest thing. There had
Yeah.
been publicity for this, particularly through some specific deaf channels online. And a woman reached out to me on Facebook and said, "Hey, I used to be John Zakutny's interpreter.
Mhm.
And he was here in Pittsburgh, but then his sister came and took him a while back. I don't know if you can reach out to her, but you might be able to find him." And I did. And he happens to live in Northern Virginia. We were launching the book in DC. So it just worked out. Really,
And
really fun.
I imagine they must be elderly by now. I'm trying to do
Yes,
the
in
math about
their,
all their.
yeah, 80s or so. And, not as mobile as they once were, obviously, but listening to them retell some of the stories up on stage with the interpreters, voicing for the audience was a highlight for a lot of the people that came.
Yeah. And so I know that you said that you haven't gotten the reaction after the book signing, but how did they feel just having you contact them? Because like you said, most people don't know their story. How did they feel finally finding out there was somebody writing a book about them?
When I phrase it to them in terms of school outreach and things like that, it's super exciting for them to know that kids will know the story. I don't. I know that they have been finally recognized by Gallaudet University, but I'm not sure they've been fully recognized by NASA. And so I just kind of drive home the point that no matter what happens with that, kids all over the world are going to read this book and be able to know what you did. So that's really exciting for them.
Well, and I know you've talked about, I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about that. On social media, you've talked about trying to get recognition for them or more official recognition from NASA. How is it, why do you think that's so slow in coming? That it seems like it's a pretty difficult process.
It's very difficult. I've been trying for about a year and a half, and I'm not sure what the holdup is. Honestly, I think NASA is just busy with other things, right? I mean, we just launched Artemis
Yeah.
yesterday.
Yeah.
So I think it's more just they're busy versus, an intentional thing.
Right.
But I don't know that it's really hard to send someone out and acknowledge them in any way. A pin, a letter, a patch, something. And I just would love to see that happen for them because they've told me specifically how much that would mean to them. So I
Mm,
think at this point, it's just an oversight.
right. And you've talked about how this book is the deaf trifecta because it's a deaf story by a deaf author and a deaf artist. If people haven't seen, I'll show the cover again. Beautiful artwork. So why is that so important? Because we talked a little bit about why representation is important, but also I would imagine not just that it's a deaf story, but it's being told by a deaf author, being illustrated by a deaf illustrator. Why is that so special?
There are not enough books out there with that, right? So, and I knew that it would be important to the deaf community, which I've only really found myself diving into in the last 2 years. I went to two different summer camps this year, and really just immersing myself into the culture, living without, my cochlear implant and my hearing aid for the first time. And I learned at those camps how oftentimes you'll see kids or adults online, for example, signing a popular song, and then their followers just go up and up and up, and they're not deaf. They're either students learning sign language or maybe they're studying to be interpreters, whatever it might be, but they're taking away um, the following for those who truly are deaf. I'm not explaining this well, but so at both deaf camps, I heard this. And at that point, we had already hired the deaf illustrator. I knew that that was going to be important, but on Sunday, with a strong showing of the deaf community at this event, the number of them that were applauding when I mentioned that was
Mm.
so heartwarming for me. And my editor was there, and I think it was really great for her to see how much they appreciated that effort by Little Brown to make sure that we were doing this. And I have done a couple school visits all week. Several of them were to deaf schools. And so mentioning that again in those spaces, and just to see their faces light up, knowing that we pushed for this to happen and knowing that it did happen, and then seeing the artwork for themselves. I have another book coming out in 2028 with them, another deaf story with another deaf illustrator. So it's just important. It's important for that community to be like, you know what, we can do this. Give us the chance to do this and let us show you that we can make it work. So it really is just an incredible thing.
What tell us about your other book that's coming out? And you said that's when is it coming out?
In January of 28.
Mm.
And it's called a name sign for Serafina. And in the deaf community, once you've been welcomed into that space, they will typically give you what they call a name sign. And so I gave Serafina a long name on purpose because it would be really hard to fingerspell that name. And so getting a name sign is really not just a shortcut to your name, it's really more a cultural thing. It can represent your personality or something unique about you. And so this story is about a girl who's been mainstream for 2 years, but the story begins on her first day, midway through third grade, into a deaf school finally, and her parents are hearing. So she walks in and the kids are introducing themselves. They, my name is Gabriel, they finger spell, but then they say, oh, and my name sign is, and they're doing their name sign. And she's like, name sign, like, what is that? So she learns what it is, and she wants her name sign so badly. So she starts to give herself one, and they're like, no, no, you can't. It's a gift from someone in the community. You have to wait. But she's not very patient. So every day she comes to school trying really, really hard to show all of her personality, hoping that they'll finally give her her name sign.
Oh, that's so sweet. And so it's another picture book.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So do you think that you're gonna you see more picture books in the future, or you want to also do more middle grade?
I love middle grade. I think my heart will always be there. Right now, as you probably know, middle grade is a very tough market.
Mm.
Uh, for whatever reason. I was also a former high school librarian, so I know that being in that space right now with everything that's going on politically is difficult. It's difficult for us to be able to purchase books as librarians, and then what books are we allowed to purchase? And I think middle grade has truly been hit the hardest in that respect. So for now, as long as I keep having picture book ideas, I'll keep writing them. I'm still writing middle grade on the side,
Mhm.
but it might be a while before I try to get back into that space with a full novel. We'll see.
Well, congratulations on this book. It is so beautiful and such a powerful story, I think, for any kid who's reading it. And I'm excited to see how it does, and also about your next book coming out. So when that comes out, we'll be sure to share about that as well. So thank you for taking the time. I know
Thank
you're
you.
so busy this week, but it's so
That's
exciting to
okay.
talk to you on book launch week.
I love everything you guys are doing. Thank you for highlighting those books and making sure that people know about them, because that is a tremendous thing that you guys are doing.
Oh, well, thank you. And thanks to all of you for watching. If you joined us late, this is going to be up on Instagram in just a few minutes, and later it will also be on our YouTube channel. So, Kerry, thanks so much. It was so great to talk with you.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.